We got boba. Let's talk about all my August reads. That's a boba dance. Hello, book friends. It's Alyssa. Welcome back to the channel. Hello if you are new. We are catching up on all the videos I didn't get to do while in the midst of Booker madness. So we are going to wrap up August, and that'll get us back on track with everything I have been reading. I sent out with my Patreon early access, I sent out a little list of some of the things that are coming. So you can always head over to Patreon and see that. Then my most for the July wrap-up post, at the bottom there's just like videos that I'm working on. So if you want to know what else is coming down the pipe coming, let's jump into my Storygraph stats for August and get this wrapped up, and we can move on with our lives, and we can get back to all the other things that we talk about on this channel, that we do on this channel, that whatever. Look, I'm ready for a nap, so I don't know. I woke myself up so there'd be daylight when I film, and I'm tired. In the month of August, I read 20 books, which is 6,152 pages. It's still taking me about a week to finish a book, and the moods this month, thanks to Booker, are very depressing, reflective, emotional, dark, challenging, sad, mysterious. We're also adventurous and informative. So yeah, Booker really had an impact. The pace is very slow, predominantly slow, which makes sense given all the Booker books. I'm sitting in my sweet spot of 300 to like 500 page books. That was half the books I read. That is really the size of a book I really like to read. A shorty is nice. I see a lot of people coming out with videos for shorty September. I'm curious to see what's on people's lists, because it is nice to read a short book and just get that dopamine hit of finishing a book. And especially if it's a really well-written short book. Ooh, those are the best. But 300 to 500 pages is my sweet spot. Any longer than that, sometimes I'm like, what are you doing? You've gone too far. But some people need to edit their shit down. We are sticking to the same split. So it's 80-20 exactly this month for fiction to nonfiction. I do like that split. I think it's a good split for me. And then my genres are predominantly literary, historical, queer, memoir, fantasy. There's definitely going to be a lot more historical, I think, just in general because of Booker. And then my ratings overall took a dive in August. So my average rating is 3.58 with a pretty wide spread between 2 and 5 stars. I will say I haven't had a lot of books that I've been like 1 star to this year. I just have been doing a fairly good job of avoiding those, and knock on wood, I will continue to avoid those truly terrible books for the rest of the year. But yeah, that is everything that I read, the stats of everything I read, I should say. And we're going to move on to the bookly, and we're going to get into all the books that I read. And before that, I'm going to have a sip of boba. Okay, so we are going to do our usual. We'll slide through the bookly. I'll talk about books. I am not going to talk too much about the Booker Prize books. I will link the playlist down below if you want to see any of these reviews. They are in the playlist. I'm done talking about them for now, or until I need to shout with people in the comments or something. But I'm done for the moment talking about those books. But we'll start at the top with the book that was robbed of the Booker Prize, and that is Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. I thought this is a challenging read, but it's very good. And I think if you are trying to read this, at least the first time around, I think this is something that would benefit from multiple reads. But I think that if you were to read this and try to parse out all the really little details, like what does every little thing mean, and you're trying to like really closely read it and read it deeply, I think you're gonna hate it. I think if you just kind of let it all wash over you and you let the humor in and you listen to the way she uses language to really get her points home about Aboriginal sovereignty, about the environment, about how Aboriginal bodies are treated, about racism, about the policies that have been made to regulate Aboriginal people in Australia, the history of these people, all that stuff. If you just let it all wash over you and you let Alexis Wright take your hand and lead you on down the path of this book, you're going to enjoy it. It is wacky at times. There's a lot of names. It does take a second to get yourself situated in the story because there's people that have like multiple names, like depending on what's happening, somebody calls them a different name. But I mean, if you read Russian literature, they do that there too. So get over it. But this is very 100 Years of Solitude. I know when I was talking about reading it, I think I said Mariana Enriquez, it was like, but I got my brain cross there was a glitch in the brain. It's Gabriel Garcia Marquez is very reminiscent of 100 Years of Solitude in terms of that like large allegorical complex almost magical, well, I would say this is almost magical realism like story. It's so good, and I don't know how it wasn't on the Booker Prize. I really don't know, especially after reading all the books. It seems like, was it just too many pages for the judges? I don't know. But anyway, I'm gonna get over it. Otherwise, I'm gonna start sounding like everybody with Demon Copperhead last year. But shut up. Moving on. Mansfield Park, I did finish that finally, and I do have a review coming that's on the list to film today. I've got 3 videos I'm filming today. This is the first one, so it'll only get worse from here. But I do have a review for Mansfield Park coming to continue that series of my year with Austen. And I have to say, it's still not my favorite Austen. I don't think it's my least favorite. I don't know. I don't think it's hard. Like, even like my least favorite Austen is still a book I really like, you know? You're just forcing me to rank things. But I really was pleasantly surprised by this. I think that there is a lot more maturity in Mansfield Park than in her other books, especially reading it in the order we're reading it in, because we just read Northanger. So to read Mansfield right after that is a very interesting experience, because though I really enjoyed Northanger, it's a very youthful, let's say, story compared to Mansfield. Mansfield feels different than all of her other novels. Her other novels so far, they all have a different tone. It's a little bit more frivolity to it. There's a little bit more, they're like lighter in tone in a lot of ways. And not that this is a heavy book in any way, but it just deals with things a little differently. I can't quite articulate it, but some of it I think comes down to how usually your main characters are the really interesting, outgoing, vivacious sort of people you think Emma, Lizzie, Marianne, like Fanny isn't like that. Edmund isn't like that. The people that are like that are the Crawfords, and they are not meant to be the heroes of this story. And also, I think this is quite scandalous. The way that Mansfield ends is quite scandalous compared to her other novels. And I like that she goes there. And it's her only novel that I've read that I'm aware of that really truly speaks to the slave trade. Not that she is an abolitionist by any means, but you see it, it's there, it's talked about. Like it is a part of the text, as opposed to being sort of, we know it's there in the background in all the other books, but it's not being discussed. It is discussed in Northanger in Mansfield, because that's how the Bertrams make money. But anyway, I definitely enjoyed it. It's better than I thought. Fanny was not as insipid and annoying and as much of a pushover as I kind of always thought she was. I still find the relationship between her and Edmund just weird. It's weird to be mooning over your first cousin. It's just weird. I'm sorry. I hesitate to say on the internet it's less weird if it's your second cousin, but genetically speaking, it is less weird if it's your second cousin. It's still forking weird. Different times, different times, different times. That's what I'm gonna go with. Ugh. Ugh. Just think about your first cousins. Ugh. No. Moving on. We have This Strange Eventful History by Claire Massaud. Boring, boring, boring. I really like Disco King's rant about this book. I think it's spot on. And yeah, no, don't know how this is on there other than the fact that I think there's a blurb on the UK editions from one of the judges. So I'm guessing it has something to do with that. Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. I get why people like it. I could not. I could not. It's too repetitive. I applaud the attempt. Not successful in my humble opinion. Enlightenment by Sarah Perry. Many of you will call this boring. I enjoyed myself. I enjoyed the like heavy-handed, pompous writing, the beautiful lyrical writing. I don't care that that's not how people talk. I enjoyed myself. Unrequited love, the cosmos, things that are bigger than you, an exploration of like the complex relationship our characters have with religion. Down for it, but definitely not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I get why people dislike it, but I don't care because I liked it. Wild Houses, I just don't know why it's on the Booker. It's fine. It's unrealistic that there's zero consequences for any of the things that happen in this book. For Patreon, we read How the Female Body Drove 200 Years of Human Evolution, Eve by Kat Bohannon. This book was fascinating and funny, and I'm very grateful that it was funny because I think that otherwise this could have become a very dry science book. But she breaks it down into different aspects of the human bodies and like human evolution. So we talk about tools, and that leads us to like gynecological tools and how we had to have come up with things to help us give birth because just anatomically it's like very difficult for an upright bipedal humanoid to give birth compared to on all fours kind of pre-humanoid. We talk about things like how our brains work and how men and women's brains are different, which that chapter I think was done really well and very delicately because it can very quickly become a very weird it could go to some dark places, but our brains do definitely function differently, and women's brains, because of our hormones and our hormone fluctuations and the hormone fluctuations we have during specific moments in our lives, i.e. like giving birth or just pregnancy in general, menopause, getting our periods, like those things do change the way our brains work because hormones are signaling systems in our body. So therefore, if our hormones are different, then things will be different, and it's all tied in. But science, yeah. So it was just, I found this very, very, very fascinating. There's a lot of highlighting, a lot of trying to like articulate all my thoughts on it. Really loved it. So glad I read it. And there's a lot of asides about transgender women and their experiences. And Kat Bohannon is like very much does her best to validate trans women, and I think that it's beautifully done. I'm very, very, very happy that it's in there because this very easily could have been a book that could be used by certain people to be like, you're not a real woman. So I really enjoyed her threading those points throughout the book the way that she did. Great book. Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. Okay, I see what some of you were saying about how you like this book. I thought about just like borrowing the audiobook or something and seeing if I like it better on audiobook because sometimes a different format is better, but I just don't think it's that serious. I just didn't like her. I didn't really care for this. Moving on. My Friends by Hisham Matar. This was actually a great book. I just wish there was like, there's like an intangible. I talked about it in my review. There's like a little something that I wish was in there. Like there's like an umami not missing from this book to make it 5 stars for me. And some of that's probably because this is one of the more hyped books going into Booker, but there's nothing objectively wrong with this book. Really enjoyed this. It's interesting. We're looking at 3 different Libyan men and their experiences after this event that happens in their youth, and you see the way that this event just steers 3 men in different directions, including our narrator who is basically just stuck. He stagnates, he freezes, he is kind of like a man without country, and It's interesting, but there's just something that's missing from a 5-star. Held by Anne Michaels. I love this. I understand why other people don't. I love a good fragmented, poetic, like just beautiful, sumptuous writing book. I loved it. I see the criticisms from others, but I don't care. But it's not gonna be for everybody. It's also not like a perfect 5-star read for me, but I really did enjoy it. Oh, it just feelings, vibes, everything. I like when a book makes me feel an emotion, okay? Other than anger. I like when a book makes me feel something. I read this very little graphic novel from indie author Emily McCosh called Nightfallen, and I don't think this is out just yet. I backed her Kickstarter and I got a digital copy early as part of whatever I backed with her Kickstarter. I usually back all of her Kickstarters. She has a recent one that I'm not backing just because I already have the book, but I wish her sci-fi Planetfall, I wish she would do that bind up and then I would back that in a second. But anyway, so I backed this. It's her first graphic novel. She draws, she writes. It's cute. It's adorable. It's a little short. I wish she had gone a little longer. Basically it's like Day and Night are brothers, and like a piece of the night sky has fallen, and Day is meeting his brother for the first time, and they like have a little moment together. It's sweet, but like I just wish it had been fleshed out a little bit more. But I understand that's a lot of work to make a graphic novel, so I'm not gonna be like, draw more panels, but I did love it. I hope she does more graphic novels in the future, and I will back them. She is here on YouTube, well, on AuthorTube, I guess. She's on the author side of YouTube, if you want to support her. I love her books. The Lost Boy of Santa Chinoa. I don't know. Juliette Grimes. Can I say any of the words in this book cover? I don't think so. You can read it on the screen. This is a historical mystery, but leans more on the historical. This was one of my palette cleansers at the tail end of Booker, and it was okay. It was a little on the long side, and the mystery part wasn't as well fleshed out as I would like, but I liked being in this remote Italian village in the 60s and seeing kind of a world left behind post-war. And you see the impacts of Mussolini's government and the post-war government on these little villages, and you see how many men are leaving the village to go to the US to make more money. You see how in the absence of actual government, other governments arise, and by that I mean like crime, sort of mafioso stuff like that, how those institutions are created and fed and arise. It was definitely interesting. Basically, I guess she's an Italian American girl, goes to Italy, and she goes to this remote village to set up a nursery school in connection with this group. And she gets there, and there's this massive rainstorm, and there's flooding, and this post office is in rubbles, and it is in rubble. Is rubbled. There's an old post office that's just rubble. That's what I'm trying to say. When the floods recede, there's a body, a skeleton that has been exposed, and she seems to be the only one concerned about who the hell this skeleton is. It turns out there are a couple men who have gone missing from this village. They have emigrated to the United States and then were never heard of again, and she basically becomes obsessed with finding out who this skeleton is, finding out what happened to these men. And she does that, but along the way, she finds out all the secrets of this town, and she has these really interesting relationships with different people in the town. The town itself is very strange from her perspective, from an outsider's perspective. The women are very different, and there's like no real women's rights in any way, shape, or form. And she has to come to terms with a lot of things. Or maybe not to come to terms, but she has to face a lot of things that are really hard for her to swallow. Like the idea that if you get raped in this kind of culture, if your rapist marries you, that excuses the crime. And myself and our narrator are like, excuse me, what? No. So it was very interesting and well written, and it reminded me a lot of this book and movie. I talked about this in Substack called Christ Stopped at Eboli. That is very much like World War II, end of World War II. This is a little further on from that. So it's much more like what happens in these very remote Italian towns and villages. And they are really separate from a lot of what's going on in like more mainstream Italy. But anyway, very interesting. If you want a sense of what the setting of this book is, you can look up a trailer for Christ Stopped at Eboli. It's interesting. Next, we have Playground by Richard Powers. I mean, objectively, it's a fine book, I guess, but it's not for me. I didn't like how it was done. Again, I think the Disco King's review on this is phenomenal. It's better than mine. Go watch it. I don't know if Richard Powers is for me. Anyway, moving on. Meet the Georgians, Epic Tales from Britain's Wildest Century by Robert Peel. This was just a fun little collection of stories about different people from the Georgian period. I've been trying to read a nonfiction in conjunction with each Austen novel I read this year, just to add to either my knowledge of Austen or the time period or something. And this was just fun. It reintroduced me to Lady Hamilton. I hadn't thought about her in years, and that got me watching That Hamilton Woman again. And I love Vivian Leigh, and it was just interesting. Like, the Georgian period is a fascinating period of time because it is quite a racy and bawdy period that gets more subdued as the period goes on. And then you hit the Victorians, and we all know what the Victorians were like. So it's an interesting time period, definitely, to look at. This is more of like if you want a sampler of what Georgian history could maybe offer you, people you might want to deep dive on. This is a good little like taster of what you could research more on, look for books on, etc., etc. It doesn't really go in depth into any one thing, but it's a good way to get your feelers out and see what you want to learn. Wandering Stars, Tommy Orange, absolutely adore this. Phenomenal. 10 stars. Love it. I hope it's shortlisted, but every time I really love something, I feel like they don't shortlist it. So Please Stop Trying to Leave Me by Alana Saab. I really loved this. I think one footnote here, though, is there is no quotation, punctuation, that kind of stuff. It is just line breaks. And I think it's done very purposefully to make it a little bit unclear who is saying what, and a little bit unclear what is internal and what is external dialogue, for a reason, because our narrator she's an author, she's struggling to write these stories, and she has a lot of trauma, and she is in what she's calling oblivion. I believe I've read 2 books that have names for pieces of their like mental illness or breakdown. So she has a mental breakdown, major depressive episode, and the period, I guess, after that, the period after she breaks, she calls oblivion. She's going to therapy, and it's sections of her talking to her therapist, which are that sort of muddled, no quotation mark. Is she talking as the therapist talking? Is she talking to the therapist, or is she talking to herself, or thinking stuff to tell the therapist? And you follow her over the course of several months, and then interspersed between these meetings with her therapist are stories that she has written. And the stories, are they autofiction? Are they memoir? Are they all made up? We don't know. We do know, but we don't know. It's this one woman dealing with her mental breakdown. And I have been on this like mad woman mental health sort of kick lately, and this really fit into it. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was wonderful. Moving on. Coventry by Rachel Cusk. This is a collection of essays. The first like major part of this, it's probably a good like third, more than a third, like I don't know, a bit of more than a third of the book is part 1. And those are essays that she wrote more about her personal life. And I don't really care for those as much. And then the last 2 parts are more essays about other things, about artists and writers and books and stuff like that. And I liked those. I found them very interesting, and they made me want to read certain things or get to know more about like an artist or something. And I like when essays do that. I don't know if Cusk is an essayist that I'm chomping at the bit to read more from, but I read it. those were good. I found this at the dollar store for $1.25, so it was worth the $1.25. Okay. Men Have Called Her Crazy by Anna Marie Tendler. This book I have complicated feelings about. I was very excited for it to come out, and it is not necessarily bad, but there is a holding back to it that I wish wasn't there. I like when women are writing memoirs about their mental health, I like when they really write it, when they really tell it, when they go deep. And I feel like she does share a lot of stuff. It's not that she doesn't open up about her relationships with men and the things that have happened to her and her cutting and her eating disorder and all that. She does open up about things, but you can feel this, or I could feel this, like holding back, this almost like it felt like she knew that people were going to read this. The people she's talking about are going to read it. And she was overly mindful of their feelings. And I don't want that in this kind of book. I want you to be overly mindful of your feelings. So I want you to let your feelings out, right? And it's also, I'm assuming, has something to do with the legality of her divorce, but the fact that basically, I think there's like 3 references to where she says like, and my divorce, but she doesn't go into anything. And while I get that she can't talk about everything, it is weird to me that you would go through such a traumatic thing, because divorce is traumatic. And I mean, I'm not a celebrity. I did not get divorced. Sorry, very uncomfortable in this chair. I did not get divorced like in the public eye. And I also didn't have I had a messy divorce, but I didn't have a messy divorce like that, where like the world is watching you kind of thing. And I think it's weird that there wouldn't be, that wouldn't have more of an impact on why maybe you had to check yourself into inpatient treatment. Sorry, too much boba. Like that definitely has an impact on your mental health. And I don't know how she would have handled it, like maybe in an author's note or a footnote, been like, or just in a side, like, everybody knows that we had this messy whatever, that, that you can read it in the paper or the tabloids, what happened between my husband and I, and like, I'm not ready to talk about it, and I can't really talk about it, but that had a major impact. Like, just say something, make a concession to it, because I think it's crazy to think that it doesn't have an impact on her mental health, or it didn't have an impact on her mental health. It didn't have an impact on her being where she was. I don't know exactly what time period we're in, but clearly at some point this book does overlap with the divorce. I still find her very interesting. I find her, like, her photographs, her use of light, her as an artist, very interesting. But anyway, I guess it was fine. I just didn't like the whole thing back. I finally read Monstrillo by Geraldo Samano Cordova. I didn't dislike this. I didn't realize this was going to be as queer as it was, so that was a pleasant surprise. And I enjoyed this exploration of grief, but also I feel like it could have been darker. I think it's because when I listen to other people talk about it, it seems like it's this really much darker horror sort of novel, and it's not. It's more like a literary novel about grief, which is fine. So I think I was looking for something that I was never going to find in the story, which is unfortunate because it just changes your relationship with the story, But I really enjoyed it. Basically, a mother and father lose their son, and the mother sort of has this psychotic break, and through acts ends up with a piece of his lung. The kid has like a pulmonary disease, and that lung, she somehow grows into another child. That's what I'm gonna say. And things happen. But it's a really interesting exploration of grief. Not that Chouette is a exploration of grief, but it reminded me a lot of Chouette in that sense of creating sort of an other to process something as a parent. I don't know, for some reason I just kept thinking about that book, and I know that they're not the same, but I just, my brain kept popping that connection in for some reason. I don't know why, but in case you care. that was there. But I did enjoy it. It was good. I almost wish I had read this when I wanted to read it when it first came out, and I didn't hear what other people had to say though, but definitely an interesting book. And then finally, at the very end of the month, I read Agua Viva and by Clarice Lispector. This slim little novel is, oh my God, it's like scratched my brain in ways that I've never had it scratched before. This is this like frenetic narrative of, I don't know like how to even describe this, where she's trying to find the words to tell you something, and that's the story essentially. But it becomes very much like existential, avant-garde. It's so interesting, and like I can't put into words. I just have feelings. And it's I mean, I was highlighting and note taking, and I need to read it again and again and again, because she makes your brain think in a way it hasn't thought before. She like scratching my brain. She goes in there and she does something to it, and suddenly there's all these listings of flowers, and now I'm like, I need to make an art piece with all these flowers, and like, so she does something. She's like a drug sometimes. I feel like reading Clarice Lispector. She changes your brain chemistry. I loved it. I'm gonna have to read it again. I don't know if it's gonna be for everybody, but I don't care. I loved it. Great. That's everything I read in the month of August. So that's it, folks. That's all I read. The only thing I'm really carrying over is Lies and Sorcery by Alyssa Morante. We know this. I'm like determined to finish this book, despite the fact that it's boring AF. It is so fucking boring. I don't quite know why it's got the hype that it's got. Maybe if I read it in Italian, which I will never do, I would feel differently, but it just goes on. Like, there's this character, Eduardo, who I thought at this point is dead. I'm in the middle of part 5 of 6 in an 800-page book. How is Eduardo being brought up again? He did. Can we leave Eduardo somewhere else? I don't even like Eduardo, so I think he just needs to die. Let him be at peace, Eduardo. That's what I'm carrying over. I would love to know your thoughts on any of these books if you've read them. For September, October, we're reading The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. If you're in any of like the paid things on any of my Substack or Patreon, you get the link to the Discord. You can talk in there. I'll be there talking about it. I'm exhausted. And that was a lot. This is a long video. Those were a lot of books. I haven't read this many books in a while. How did I read this many books like every month, basically last year? Mental illness? I don't know. I'm tired. Anyway, we're caught up. We are in September now. We are on our September reads. I need to stretch and get into my next recordings. So that's it. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video, whatever it may be, because it's my channel and I can do whatever I want. Bye.
So just sit with me, talking to the night until the morning, building chemistry. I don't think I ever want to go come closer next to me, trying to find another way to say this, but I think